Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, From Policy to Practice, Texas Approach to High Quality Summer Learning. All right, hello. Hopefully you can hear us. Today's webinar, we'll be digging into a recent report from AIR, American Institutes of Research, that was commissioned by the Wallace Foundation, applying summer learning evidence, how Texas state policy supports strong programming. Now, this report was released in October 2024. What you can expect from the first half of this webinar is we're going to get into those report findings. And then the second half will feature a conversation between our team here at the Forum's Weichert Center for Program Quality, who provided some coaching support in Texas. Then we're going to wrap up with an audience Q&A. So at any time, please feel free to drop your questions that you have either in the chat, or you can actually use our Q&A feature, and we will make sure that we address those questions later on. Speaking about webinar features, here are the features we're going to use today. We have our chat box, so we're going to go ahead and ask you all. Some of you have started to do that already. We'd love to see it. We're going to ask for you all to do us a favor, introduce yourself in the chat, share your name, your pronouns if you feel comfortable, your organization, and location. Where are you zooming in from today so that we can all know who is here in our virtual space? This chat is really open for you all to engage with one another as well throughout our webinar. Again, you can also use this amazing Q&A feature that we mentioned before. You can feel free to drop any questions there, and we will be sure to address those when we get to our Q&A portion. Now, another quick housekeeping item, just so that you know, this webinar is being recorded, and the webinar will be able to be shared a few days after this event. All right, I am going to be your hostess with the mostest today. My name is Siobhan Dotson from the Forum for Youth Investment, and we're really excited to host this very important conversation. At the Forum, we envision a world where all young people reach their fullest potential in education, work, and life. And our work really focuses on these three key areas: program quality, systems change, and policy. Speaking of how we do our work, today's discussion is really going to deeply connect not only to the policy work that we do, but also to our program quality efforts, which are supported by the Forum's Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality. We do this through our Youth Program Quality Improvement, or YPQI, if you've heard of it. That's our approach. We help organizations strengthen their programs by using this beautiful framework we have here. It's our prepare, assess, plan, and improve cycle that we use for continuous quality improvement. Now, this approach has been especially impactful in Texas during this work, where investments in program quality have helped expand opportunities for young people there. All right, now let's dive into the findings from this report. I am so pleased to welcome today Jesse Newman, who's the senior researcher at American Institutes for Research, and also Rashma Belazor, who's the manager of additional days school year at the Texas Education Agency, who will take us through the key insights.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am so excited to be here with you today. I will be joined shortly by Rashma, as Siobhan said, and we're really excited to talk to you about the work that they've been doing in Texas to support strong summer programs. We'll share some lessons learned from an ongoing study that we've been working on, and have some time to answer some questions at the end too. So let's go ahead and we'll dive in. Before we get into the work that Texas has been doing, the study, its findings, I think it's really important to frame why we're doing this at all. So I'm going to take a little bit of a step back before we step forward. As many of you likely know, I'm guessing that's why you're here today, there's an extensive body of research on what works in summer learning programs. So I thought it might be good to start there. From the research, for example, we know that strong summer learning programs do specific things, or they design their program in specific evidence-based ways what you'll probably hear me call evidence-based design principles. And when those things are in place, those programs can be more effective. Research on the National Summer Learning Project, for example, which was a 6-year initiative launched by the Wallace Foundation to support 5 large urban school districts to create and run high quality summer learning programs, has produced a lot of really powerful evidence. And part of that evidence articulates a set of recommended practices that were proven to be really effective in those districts. So, all good. So I want to talk a little bit about what, strong summer learning programs do. In other words, like what are their evidence-based design principles, right? And that's a mouthful. You're going to hear me stumble over that for the next 20 minutes or so. To better understand the literature, we reviewed a number of sources, some of which are listed on the screen, to elevate those evidence-based design principles. And we looked for themes, we looked for commonalities, we noticed where maybe there were some differences in how the literature was framing some of these practices, and also, where there were some gaps, things that we know are happening in the real world out in the field, but maybe they haven't been fully explored through rigorous research. And we were able to identify 10 evidence-based design principle areas with a number of specific practices within each area. And I know you cannot see this on the screen. We're going to put a link to the brief in the chat. This overview is on page 6. We'll spend some more time talking about these today. But, it's great. So we know what the evidence base is. We know what works when, it comes to summer learning program. But I think as a field, what we really need to understand is how we bring those evidence-based practices to life, right? Like, how do you take it out of the research report and then apply that on the ground? And quite frankly, how do you apply that in contexts that may be different from where the research was originally conducted? So those are some of the big questions that I think we're kind of grappling with in the field and what we've had the opportunity to explore over the last few years in Texas. So I'm going to turn to Texas, where the state has been implementing a really innovative approach to summer learning programs for students in grades K through 5. It's called the Additional Days School Year, or what you might hear us call as ADSE. And Rusham is going to talk more about this in a minute, but just to give a little bit of context, the state has provided a planning program to support the design and implementation of summer learning programs that are grounded in the evidence base that I was just talking about. And I won't get too into the details now, but just to kind of set the stage for what lies ahead. This planning program is a 4-year program, and cohorts of local education agencies come together as a learning community, and they participate in this really robust planning year that helps them plan for the initial implementation of programming in their first summer. And if you've read the reports from the National Summer Learning Project, you will know planning is probably one of the most important parts of running a summer program. So the fact that there is this planning program to do exactly what the evidence base says is important, is really an important thing to note here. And then, the cohorts have, after their planning year, they have multiple implementation years. They're able to focus on continuous improvement. But the important thing to know is that this planning program is grounded in the evidence base. So all local education agencies are really working toward designing this evidence-based summer learning program. And the fact that Texas was doing this created a really amazing opportunity for us to learn alongside the state to better understand that question I was asking earlier, right? Like, how do we bring this to life? And we have this really great real world example of that happening right now in Texas. So through the Texas Summer Learning Study, which is currently in its 5th year, we set out to explore, what's going on in Texas. It was launched by the state. It's being implemented in local education agencies across the state. What does it really take to implement and scale strong summer learning programs that are grounded in the evidence? And I will say that this study has been so fun because the initiative, it's really helping us to understand choices around the implementation of evidence-based design principles. Like, we've really been interested and learned so much about how and why local education agencies are designing their summer learning programs, why they're making the choices that they do, where they've had to make adaptations from the evidence base. And we're also learning a lot about the supports that are needed to make this happen. And I think that's particularly insightful for policy efforts, since the work in Texas is underpinned by state policy. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So I want to share a little bit of what we're learning. But before I get into that, the last thing I just want to say to everyone who's joining, and I saw, there are all sorts of different roles in the chat. People are coming from many different places all across our country, is I want to encourage everyone to really think about what we're going to share in relation to your own context. Because I think that the lessons that we've learned can translate to a lot of different scenarios. And I think sometimes it can be hard maybe to see something happening in one state, right? A big state with a very specific policy context. And it's easy to go like, oh, well, that just won't work here, right? And you could be right. But it's my hope here that there's something we can learn from the lessons in Texas that can be adjusted and applied to fit where you're coming from, in the context that you're in the role that you're in with the organizations that you have around you supporting summer learning work. So with that in mind, let's start with the big takeaway, the key findings, so to speak. We have found that state policy can support the design and implementation of strong and evidence-based summer programs, and that those policies may be especially effective when they are supported with funding, planning tools, and technical assistance, and when there is some flexibility built in to allow for adaptations based on the local context. So that was a lot. That's like the biggest of big findings I think, I could get, but we're going to unpack this finding for everyone as we go. So let's start with the policy context, because summer learning in Texas has had a lot of support. I am very happy to be joined by Rushama Belazor. She has been such a strong champion for strong summer programming, specifically in Texas, and also the state's ADSI work more broadly. So thank you, Rushama, for being here. And let me just start by asking you to describe the different policies and the policy conditions in Texas that have enabled strong summer programming.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jesse. So in terms of policy decisions that have impacted strong summer programming in Texas, it really started in June 2019 with the passage of House Bill 3 by the 86th Texas legislature, which provided a comprehensive reform of Texas school finance systems, and through that added half-day formula funding for school systems that add up to 30 instructional days to any of their elementary schools starting in the 2020-2021 school year. And this initiative is called ADSI, or the Additional Day School Year Initiative. And ADSI was created to address summer learning loss, which can have that profound effect on students from low-income backgrounds. With the cumulative impact of summer learning loss, creating that gap of up to 3 grade levels for low-income students by 5th grade, which was something that is of a concern, and the reason why this initiative was created to help support with learning acceleration in the state. And this funding for ADSI was made available to campuses that are meeting certain requirements, like having a campus that's serving that grade level within grades pre-K to 5, having the campus academic calendar that meets ADSI eligibility, like having 180 instructional days to help address more time, which is one of the things that compounds the effect of summer learning loss. And then ensuring that there's a certified teacher that's delivering those hours of instruction on those ADSI days to really help support learning acceleration. And on the state side, ADSI as an initiative could be implemented by school districts in 3 ways. They could implement it via an intersessional calendar for targeted remediation for students. They could implement it via a full year reimagined schedule that increases student brain breaks, teacher planning time, and really extends the school year well into the summer. the very third option was to create a summer learning program for something additional for a targeted subset of students that included something like summer learning enrichment, which is what the focus here today is, and what that research that that Jesse will be sharing with everyone really focuses on. And the other thing for us to think about through is that following this sweeping passage of House Bill 3 in June 2019 came the pandemic, and the significant influx of ESSER funding into K through 12 systems during the pandemic to help incentivize implementation of those evidence-based interventions to address learning loss, which is also something that Texas had already started doing with ADSE, and with that passage back in 2019. And so a lot of these conditions, along with our partnership with the Wallace Foundation, really set the stage for the agency to create the ADSE Planning and Execution Program, which provides that comprehensive support for districts to implement summer programs that are aligned with RAND research on summer learning, and really helped add additional requirements for ADSE eligibility to help districts plan those evidence-based summer programs.
Thank you, Rashama. And I think, one of the things that's really interesting, so you had this state policy that said, it created this mechanism for a summer learning program. And you really raised the bar with the planning program, right? To really think about evidence-based design principles. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And that happened before COVID. And, we all know with COVID, there was this influx of funds, particularly to support summer learning programs. So that was a really great thing to have in place to be able to build from. So let's talk a little bit more about that planning program. I know LEAs have had to agree to meet additional requirements when they join the planning program. Many of those requirements, like you said, they pulled directly from the research. Can you break those down for us?
Of course. As part of this program, ADSE, the ADSE Planning and Execution Program was really meant to help expand on the Texas initiative. And so a lot of the requirements that were added to ADSE for those ADSE Planning and Execution grantees really leaned heavily on the RAND research. And so I want to talk through this slide really quickly that really outlines what ADSE does at the state level for any district that's participating, which is meeting those base ADSE eligibility requirements, like those campuses having those 180 instructional days, meeting those operational minute requirements as set by the state, making sure that the eligible students are participating on those ADSE days. And what happens after they meet those base eligibility requirements is that half-day formula funding flows on those additional days that they're adding beyond their calendar. Following those base eligibility requirements comes the design components of ADSE as a whole for the state. ADSE could be implemented, districts could take advantage of 1 or 30 of those days that really adds that formula funding to it. They could really focus on just 2 hours of instruction, which is what the minimum of that state policy set forward for LEAs. There were no requirements regarding a planning process. There were no requirements set in policy about instruction other than that those 2 of those hours had to be based on like the Texas Essential Skill Standards. And so what the ADSE PEP summer program did was build more from the base requirement of what it takes to qualify for ADSE and to really lean into the research that we know from RAND. And so as you see like this side-by-side comparison, you're really seeing that focus on the research-based design and based on the study from RAND, which found that when summer programs are planned and implemented with specific quality parameters, it led to learning acceleration in students. And this initiative really was about learning acceleration for our students. And so we added these requirements as part of what we learned from the research from RAND. And so what happens is now, as part of an ADSE PEP ADSI planning program, these LEAs are not just taking advantage of one of the ADSI days, they are required to use 25 to 30 of those ADSI days to create a summer program. They had to ensure that that program was running for 6 hours per day in the summer, and that 3 of those hours were dedicated to math and reading. And that 2 of those hours were enrichment activities, and 1 flex hour to continue to support transition time, lunch, or add additional enrichment opportunities for students. The next thing that you'll see that the ADSI Planning and Execution program did was really allowed our LEAs to go through a year-long guided planning process with support. And they were required to designate a project manager at the district level to really lead the work for summer learning at the district. And then it also allowed them to create a cross-departmental steering committee to really drive planning and really stamp the importance of summer learning in a child's learning journey at the local level. The very next thing that that this grant did was really recommend high quality instructional material summer units for LEAs, and then support them by going through a review process to use those high quality materials to help accelerate learning. And the other thing that's not included on this slide, but ensuring that during those 3 hours of academic hours, that it's certified teachers that are delivering instruction for students, ensuring that as aligned to the RAND research, programs really have to be offered at no cost to families. And so meals and transportation had to be provided to families at no cost as part of this program. It also included additional professional development for teachers and any program staff prior to the start of the summer program to help ensure that everyone is aligned on what's happening in the summer program, the importance of things like climate and culture within a summer program, and the enrichment activities. And so this allowed LEAs to really go through this year-long intensive summer starts in September process where they're really focusing on what are we going to do in those 25 to 30 days, and how are we going to ensure that our students are having fun as well as helping them accelerate their learning.
Thank you. I mean, I just think this is such a great example of how research becomes relevant, right? And what you see in this ADSI PEP summer column here comes directly from research conducted on summer learning programs. We know this is what works. It is now part of state guidance and supports for these summer learning programs. And these are just a few examples of how the planning program incorporated some of the evidence base as a requirement, right? But what I think, at least in my view, one of the things that's most important is not just that the state required some of these things if you're participating in the planning program, but also how the state then supported the implementation of these and other requirements, right? Because it's not enough to just say, programs should be designed in such a way. Really, what we've found is that by providing support, we were more likely to see implementation of those evidence-based design principles. So, I want to talk about the support a little bit. It was vast and robust, and we could spend hours really detailing the nuances of the planning program, which, if anyone wants to talk to me offline, we're happy to get nerdy about that with you. But I want to sum up the supports that were provided maybe in 3 big buckets, which was funding, planning tools, and technical assistance, right? So I already mentioned this earlier, but by participating in this planning program, local education agencies were already engaging in some of these evidence-based design principles just by the sheer fact that it exists, right? Rajama said summer starts in September, right? Like planning early, planning comprehensively, engaging different people. That's a big part of this. They had funding that enabled them to have a dedicated project manager for summer learning, right? To participate in this planning program, that person then had access to tools and resources. They had support for, operations and different technical assistance resources. Like I said earlier, the planning program included a learning community where all of those dedicated project managers were able to come together. They learned about the evidence base together. They, were able to work through planning tools. They had a really comprehensive strategic plan template that served as the anchor for this work. And the strategic plan template and the supporting tools really, they laid out step by step what the different evidence-based design principles were. And they were able to, engage in this facilitated planning process to then design a program in alignment with the evidence base that fits their context. And throughout the whole thing, they've had technical assistance from experts in the field. We'll hear from one of them in a little bit. And those experts worked with them during the planning process for, at least the first year, and then in those implementation years, to explain the rationale behind some of the evidence base to help them make decisions in context. So it was a really robust system of supports to help them meet those requirements and then some. The supports were really instrumental, but our study also found that there were, a number of different influencing factors that affect the implementation. And I would be remiss if I didn't just mention that for a minute. A big part of this planning program has been having the flexibility. I think this was an enabling factor in many ways because the policies and the tools and the resources that were provided, they were not prescriptive. They didn't tell them, local education agencies, exactly what to do, but they gave guidance around how to plan and what to consider. So I'll give an example. Rushama mentioned the high quality instructional materials. The requirement is that you had to use high quality instructional materials, but it didn't say which ones you had to use, right? Local education agencies were able to select the ones that best fit the needs of the students they were serving in the local community. Another example I often think about is related to marketing and student recruitment, right? How do you select or invite young people to participate in this program? And there's a lot that we've learned from the National Summer Learning Project about how important it is to communicate things that make that communication and recruitment and enrollment and retention effective. So those principles were shared with LEAs, and then they had the flexibility to determine how to market and recruit students in a way that aligned with their local community, for example. And the last thing I'll say, I want to note that there's been a lot that we've learned about continuous improvement. And I'll just say, and this isn't an official study finding, this is just Jessie talking here, but the way that I have watched this initiative evolve and grow over the last 5 years in response to feedback and input from local education agencies, in response to lessons learned, data from our study. Rushama knows I nerd out about this all the time, but it really has just been so cool and inspiring to see, right? They have been able to adjust the way the planning program is implemented each year in response to feedback to make it work better for local education agencies. So I want to end with that. I'm going to turn to Rushama to close us out with one last question on that topic. Rushama, do you want to just tell us a little bit more about some of the big lessons learned from TEA's perspective in doing this work and how you all have continued to evolve and improve the planning program?
Yes. So, as everyone knows, the research has been done on summer learning programs, and we have found ways to, at the state level, support districts in incorporating what RAND has learned. And now we're in the implementation phase. Like, this is year 4 of the existence of the ADSI Planning and Execution Program. And we've been responsive to what we're learning from districts as they implement these programs. And for example, the strategic planning tool has evolved based on feedback from districts and how they're interacting with the tool and how they use it to create a summer learning guidebook at their local level for their district. And even now, in this upcoming school year, we're still gathering feedback from LEAs about their professional development experiences that really help them learn about the success criteria that's associated with the RAND research and how connected they feel to the summer learning success criteria. And with the goal here always being, what are the pieces of the feedback that we're able to implement to continuously help support them and help this make this a smooth transition as possible from learning about the research and then really applying it at the local context. We also hear from our districts time and time again that in the first year of planning, receiving support from a technical assistance provider and implementation partner is crucial for how they're implementing a program that's based on the research from RAND. And so RTA providers have really done a tremendous job in supporting LEAs as they plan for a summer program that's rooted in those evidence-based design principles that are aligned to the RAND research. And so a lot of the improvements that we've made year after year has stemmed from our feedback loop with our LEAs in terms of helping them with their experiences with professional development, their experiences and technical assistance, listening to them about the additional support that they need and the gaps that they're seeing as they're implementing these programs. And one other takeaway that we have had over the last 4 years is that our LEAs have flagged concerns about the length of their calendar because the ADSI initiative is an initiative that requires a 180-day base calendar and those additional days. And for ADSI PEP, that's 25 additional days as they work to create quality programs. And the other thing that they flagged as a result for that is the ability to retain their staff on a calendar that provides such intense support for students. And in conjunction with that, our analysis of the impact of ADSI on student outcomes continue to show that students, when attending ADSI days, are outpacing the state trends in the STAR test and are seeing academic growth in math and RLA by participating in the program in general. We see that ADSI has growth, but we see stronger and growth with the ADSI PEP program, which really showcases that going through this guided planning process with TA support, with funding support, with these tools really does help LEAs plan more intentionally for their program at their local context and yields positive academic results. And I'm excited to say that these positive results are the reasons why in the 89th legislative session happening right now, ADSI is a topic of discussion in a few proposed bills in terms of lowering the entry barrier for the initiative and then incentivizing the use of ADSI days to support learning acceleration in students. So we really want to scale this initiative to help support the continuous growth that we're seeing. And we're just really excited about what this could mean for summer programming for districts and students in the state of Texas.
Thank you so much, Rushama. I mean, I think that's a perfect way to wrap this up is really reflecting on the success of something that is well designed and well implemented, grounded in the evidence, because I'm a researcher and I know I have to say that, but it matters, right? So let's go ahead. Thank you, Rushama, for joining me on this. Not only for joining on this webinar, but in the work to spread what we're learning about strong summer programs. I want to go ahead and turn it back to Siobhan so we can hear more about what's been going on at the local level in Texas.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jesse and Rashama, for that really wonderful and detailed example of how like the framework goes, the prepare, the plan, assessment, and improvement. We are now going to hear from two of the forum's staff as well, who also provided some coaching supports in Texas, Ari Pak and Jen Harris. I will pass it over to you all.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. And again, thank you, Jesse and Rashama, for sharing the amazing impacts that you all learned about through the ADSI PEP. As Siobhan said, my name is Ari Pak, and I work with the Forum's Weichert Center, who we actually served as design and implementation partners with LEAs through the ADSI PEP process. So for the D&I partners, we really focused on providing that technical assistance and coaching support, with which Jesse and Rashama mentioned were integral to really seeing the planning and implementation process through. And I have the pleasure of chatting with Jennifer Harris, one of our design and implementation specialists, who actually supported 3 different LEAs in their multi-year ADSI PEP engagement. Jennifer brings over 30 years of experience in after-school and summer learning program design, systems building, and implementation. So welcome again, Jennifer.
Thanks, Ari.
For sure. So I'm excited to speak with you today for about 10 minutes, just to learn more about the support that is needed for this type of initiative to flourish. You know, the policy context and the funding is important, but we heard also from the report that design and implementation technical assistance is really integral to supporting the intensive planning process, which leads to the success over the years. So across this conversation, I want to invite our listeners to really think about what is one takeaway for a planning strategy, a step, or a tool that might support your efforts and your context, ultimately leading to those impacts you want with young people on the ground. To start off, Jennifer, can you share a little bit more? What was your role in the ADZI-PEP program initiative with LEAs?
Yeah, thanks, Ari. So yeah, my role was serving as a consultant and a coach, providing technical assistance and support. And I would say really the big thing is keeping the eye on the prize. And the eye on the prize being taking a very intentional process. I cannot echo more than what Jesse said about the importance of planning and helping in a very strategic way design as effective of a program as possible based on the design principles that were highlighted. So training, technical assistance, meeting facilitation, gathering of resources, so many different things, marketing plan developments, anything that was really needed by the LEA to support the revision and strategic planning.
Thanks, Jen. And I'm hoping to dig a little bit more into that strategic planning process. I know we saw a robust slide of all the elements there. So from your perspective on the ground, can you walk us through the strategic planning process? And then what stood out to you as some key elements which were particularly helpful for LEAs?
Yeah, absolutely. So that, kind of how the saying goes, summer starts in September. And knowing in particular, school many times starts in August and September. It's really, the process was super important to be able to break down all these elements in a way that was meaningful and very connected. And so what that did was, at the very beginning, one of the big pieces, especially when working with LEAs more than 1 year, was taking the time to kind of get off the hamster wheel of life, I like to say, and actually reflect on what happened in the summer in real time so that you can use that data and information to continue to build out and evolve your program, just as you would from a continuous quality improvement approach, which was so key to this. So it started, with making sure the right people were around the table, bringing the individuals together, making sure everybody was on the same page of what the vision of the program was going to look like, what these best principles were, how can they be applied within the context, and then just kind of breaking away at all of those pieces and carrying on throughout the year and ensuring that you were consistently thinking and considering and getting the right people involved with all those various different types of elements. And then when summer hit, it was still a matter of checking in with programs, because then you're in real time, but at the same time checking in and helping them do any kind of in the moment revisions or supports that might be needed as they're executing the program in real time.
Yeah, and I'm excited to hear you mention continuous quality improvement. I know that Jesse mentioned that overall the ADZI-PEP process was engaging in that continuous improvement and adjusting as they heard from folks in the process. And Jen, I think Jesse's piece kind of leads into maybe what will be my final question or curiosity. I know that in your work with LEAs, there was a lot around how to bridge the gap between academics and enrichment. So can you just share maybe one key takeaway that you saw LEAs in their growth around how they understood academics and enrichment?
Yeah, I would say that was one of the biggest ahas for the schools, was that the distinction doesn't have to be so distinct. Everything can be academically enriching. And what I did in particular find with working with schools after like the first year, more times than not, teachers were coming back and super excited to be able to do so much enrichment. I mean, that's what oftentimes they're like, these are the pieces that I'm missing, out in my normal, in my normal day's work. So I think that's one of the big things is recognizing, yes, there is explicit time, but they can be woven much more together, and it's best for the outcomes for the young people, as well as in addition the outcomes for the teachers, I think, too.
Yeah, those were some of my favorite stories that we got to share as we were working through supporting LEAs, just hearing how the strategies from enrichment programming actually were helping in the academic sessions as well, and understanding that these practices kind of leverage improvements across the board, including in those academic scores. I really appreciate your time, Jen, and thank you, Jesse, also for sharing your insights with us today. It was really a pleasure to get to support on this project and learn more about how technical assistance and having that subject matter expertise, and ultimately that coach in the corner to say, this is important, we need to prioritize this planning and continuous improvement approach to really impact the outcomes for our young people and families.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ari and Jen, and also Jesse. I am going to invite all of our panelists to hop on camera, because now we're going to transition into the question and answer portion of our webinar. So just as a reminder, if you have any questions that you want to pose to our panelists here, feel free to either pop them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A feature and pose your questions there, and we will be sure to address them. But we do have some questions here. This is open to our entire panel. Our first question: how can the approach in Texas be applied at a state level or in smaller settings? And what are the first steps, including who to talk to and how to adapt it to a different context?
That's a great question. That's a big one. I was trying to think about which part of that to tackle first. One thing that stands out to me is that in the Texas Education Agency, there are different departments that have support and oversight over academic instruction, summer learning, some of the different grant programs that fund programs that are responsible for summer learning. And so I would say within your state or even your district, is there a what is the department? Is there a department that has oversight over summer learning, for example? That might be an important place to start. But also say that many states and locales have really strong intermediary organizations that support out of school time, so after school and summer, right? In Texas, for example, you have Tex Post, which is the statewide after school network that oversees after school and summer. At the city level, every hour counts. Intermediaries are across the country, right? And so I think having the support of a strong backbone organization that's knowledgeable in the evidence base is a good place to start, a good champion to have in your corner and collaborate with.
And I would add one more thing, like that we've learned from our districts, which is the importance of like bringing in the community that you're trying to serve and the decisions that you're making. Especially with ADSI being something where the calendar requires board approval to continue to maintain it. It requires communication with parents and with families to be able to support something that's so extensive that impacts their plans really for the summer, because you're hoping to provide a summer program to a subset of students. Maybe it's targeted enrichment and targeted intervention for students. You need the buy-in of the family and what they're planning on doing over the summer break to really bring those students into the program. And so that's one thing that throughout this planning process that our LEAs have had to be very intentional about the messaging that goes out to families, the timing of it, and the communication process within those communities to help make sure that I'm running a summer program and I need students in the seats to be able to serve them.
I think I'd like to echo just one thing in terms of engaging young people in the process of design, families, and then the other community partners. So there is so many opportunities that community partners want to work closer with schools. And so this opportunity of getting many different people around the table, so the fabric is, and the strength of the program is so much more strategic, is super important as well.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much, panelists, for those questions. Our next question here we have for Jesse and anyone else who would like to give an answer. Are certain design principles more important than others?
The $1 million question. I think everyone was like waiting for that to be a finding that came out of the study. And I think you'll probably get different answers from different people on this. So I'll tell you what I've observed over the last few years in Texas is no, they all matter, which makes planning something this complex and robust tricky. And that's why a planning program is a really good thing. But I think there's probably an order of operations. I think that's something we've sort of been learning. Certain design principles maybe need to be addressed first. They relate to others. You know, the curriculum choices you make influence the way you support professional development for staff. And you have to actually be able to staff your program, which needs to be based on attendance data, right? And so I think thinking about it that way, and we're hoping to illuminate more of that through the study. I will say one thing that has changed over the last few years, and I think has become really apparent, although Rushama, you can tell me if you see it differently, is the role of climate and culture. I think as we really work to create academically enriching summer programs across different settings, you know, they don't always have to be in schools, but as we really think about ways to support students and you know, in closing that learning gap, the climate and culture of the program, making sure that it's fun, that young people feel safe, that staff are engaged at the end of a school year, that is really important. And I think if you start there, the rest can kind of flow naturally.
I have to say, I echo that, Jesse, and for ADSE summer specifically, and even the way that the initiative is set up to generate formula funding, student attendance and ADA matters a lot for these programs, and strong positive climate and culture is really what helps you with retaining your teachers. It helps your students want to come back to the summer program. And it continues to be an advertising factor really when it comes to recruiting your students and your staff. And then at the end of the day, when it comes to submitting their attendance data and being able to generate that half-day formula funding, climate and culture ties into that in terms of being able to continuously have students come back day after day in the summer program. So I think a lot of LEAs will agree to that climate and culture does impact the attendance that they see across their programs.
Thank you so much, Jesse and Rashima, for those answers. We have another question here. I know we've talked about this approach in school settings, but we do have a question here. Someone asks, how do you suggest applying this approach to more diverse programs where it isn't a school setting all the time and is more workforce based?
All right, well, I'll kick us off. I think I've said this word too many times already in the last hour, but I'm going to say it again. I think there's a really important thing here about planning and planning comprehensively. And I don't know that it matters if it's in a school or what, right? It's understanding what does the research say is effective in the type of program that you're offering and planning around that. And I think there's a lot of resources in the field, so that can feel a little overwhelming, right? But there's a strong body of evidence around what works in workforce-based programs, for example. But I also think that there is a lot of lessons, there are many lessons learned from this evidence base that would translate, right? Like the climate and culture piece, I think extends regardless. I will say budgeting, there's a lot of important lessons related to budgeting, things that we've learned about having the right people at the table early enough to make some decisions that I think really matter how you market and engage students. I think some of these things really apply, and to Rushama and Jen's point earlier about family and community engagement, right? So you're applying those evidence-based design principles in a different context, right? With community-based organizations in a different focus area, but the planning and design principles kind of remain the same.
Thank you very much, Jesse, for that. Hopefully, that was a very comprehensive answer for anyone, and I love that. So since we don't see any more questions coming in, This was a great webinar, so much information shared. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, Jesse, Ari, Rashma, Jennifer, for participating and being here with us. Thank you to all of our attendees and participants. Is there any final thoughts anyone would like to share from our panelists? And I see Jesse just dropped a little note to all of us there in the chat. It says, listen, always happy to chat about workforce focused summer programs with some contact information there. Thank you so much, Jesse, for sharing.
Yeah, I don't think I could pull the research up quickly enough in this call, but happy to share it with folks.